Good evening. It's Sunday, October the 3rd, and this is the Blackman Who Reads Aloud, and I'm coming to you from Tampa, Florida, going through my personal journey through the Federal Writers Project, the Alabama Slave Narratives. And today we're visiting with the words of George Taylor. It's a personal interview given with George Taylor. George Taylor lived at 409 South Hamilton Street in Mobile, Alabama. Illa B. Pren from Mobile, Alabama did the interview. And she headed this interview with Chillin was taught to be mannerable. George Taylor, an old and very black man who lives at 409 South Hamilton Street in Mobile, says he is an ex-slave. He knows that he was born in Mobile on the corner of Cedar and Texture Street, but left Mobile and was carried to Gosport, Alabama when he was 12 years old. His father's name was Gus Taylor and his mother's Sarah Taylor, and they were owned by Mr. W.G. Herron. There were 21 children in George's family, and he said he was the oldest one and helped nurse the others. My grandfather's name was Mac Wilson, and my grandmother's name was Ellen Wilson, and the old Miss name was Miss Mammy Herron. All the colored folk children called Mr. Herron Kai Master, and he was sure a good master too. I remember that after I got to be a big boy, that he put me in the field chopping cotton, but I never could pick cotton. I knows that my pa said I was too crazy about the girl, so he took me and made me plow. Old massa had a big place. I des- I don't just exactly knows how many acres was, but I knows us had plenty of cotton. Case sometimes they would come pick 4 or 5 bales a day. And then I knows during cotton time, Ma and Pa hauled cotton all day long to the gin what was run by 5 or 6 mules. During the busy season on the plantation, old Massa had the older women cooking and sending the dinner to the fair. There was 2 baskets, one to put the bread in and the other basket to put the meat in. Every morning at 3 o'clock, the women began cooking, and each had brought his own meat and bread to this cabin to be cooked. Every person's plate had names on them. Everybody had to be up by daylight and ready to begin work. The men had to get up before daylight and begin to harness the mules, and soon as they light, uh, they was in the fields. There was 250 head of colored people excusing chilling. They would raise 5 and 600 bales of cotton a year. Us worked then. There weren't no talking about then, not even on Saturday afternoons. But I believes I liked it better than I does now, 'cause the children was taught to be mannerable then. But now they just cuss if you say anything to them. Us had a good place to stay. The old master's house was a big 2-story house, and our cabins was built on boards and was in a row. Us didn't have no stoves, just cooked out in the yard over a fire with stakes on each side of it, with an iron bar across them to hang the pots on. Old master rationed out the food. Each man was allowed 7 pounds of meat. The women was allowed 6 pounds and 5 pounds for each child. Then they give us a peck of meal, 5 pounds of flour and some molasses. I never did eat at home with my folks, 'cause I nursed in the big house, and every time the white children eat, I had to eat too. There was plenty of pecan, walnut, and chestnut trees on the place, and us could eat all the nuts we wanted. And then the slaves had their own gardens if they wanted to. Then I remember how there was four men who put the hogs in the pen to fatten. Sometimes they would put as many as 100 or 150 at a time. Then hit was their duty to tote feed from the fields to feed them. My, when I think of that big smokehouse, my mouth just waters. At hog killing time, there was certain men to kill and certain ones to cut them up. There weren't no, there weren't never no special time for hog killing. Just when the old master said, "Do it," we did it. You see, us was under us under his direction. Case if he want us to go anywhere, us had to get a pass, even to church. The white folks had Methodist church, and the colored folks had the Baptist church. I also remember the time I was put on the block to be sold, and when the man only offered $500 for me, old master told me to get down, that I was the most valuable nigger he had, 'cause I was so strong and I could do so much work. My mom was the weaver, and there was a woman named Alessa who did the dyeing. My pa gathered the bark, such as red oak, elm, maple, and juniper bark, and then dried it, and then gin hit it up. They also used borax, alum, and bluestone to set the dye. The women made the clothes out of this cloth that was woven on the place. You asked about weddings. Us didn't have weddings like us do now. The way us married would go to the big house, and old master had us jump over a broomstick, and then us was considered married. But there was one thing that us weren't allowed to do, and that was to abuse or cuss our wives, and you better not strike 'em, 'cause he hit would be just too bad. You know, miss, I've been here a long time. I remember when there was only one house between St. Louis Street and Francesca, and that was the guardhouse. I also remember the old time remedies that they used in the old days. They used red oak bark for fever and colds, and then there was whorehound and old black snake root that the old master put whiskey on. Old master made his own whiskey, and yes, the calamus root growed in the woods where they lived, and I never seen, I never seed them send to no store for medicine. I never heard about no voodoo stuff till I was grown. And another thing, folks didn't die of lack like they do now. When anyone did die, Alice had a big funeral, and the men would sometimes hitch up an ox or a mule team, and as many as could get in would go. The coffins was made and stained. There was plenty of hands to dig graves too. I tell you, miss, folks is pretty much the same. If the white folks treat the niggers right, you couldn't get them to leave them. I remembers when the Yankees come through, though. I was standing on the old master's porch, and I seen them coming, and master got up on his crutch and go to the steps and invite them in, and I believe they come in too. They was just naturally torn up, or they just naturally tore up old master's place, and then the furniture all around, and broke heap of it. I knows before they got there, old master had Ma and Jerry Lee and Mace Pouncey and another man take 4 barrels of money and carry it down to the spring and hit it in the spring. And I was telling you, miss, you couldn't get any more, you couldn't any more get near that spring than nothing, 'cause quicksand made the barrels boil up one at a time. And the way they had to get the barrels was to build a scaffold over the river and then let a line down and catch the round barrels. after we was freed, old master come out in the yard and got in the middle of all of us and told us that the ones that wants to stay with him to stand on one side and the others to stand on the other side. So Ma and Pa got on the side with those who wanted to leave, and us left old master and paddled down the river in a paddling boat to Bell's Island. As I said before, I've been here for a long time. I even remember seeing Jeb Davis. I knows I ain't here for long, but I's ready, 'cause I's been fighting for Jesus 29 years, and I ain't tired of fighting yet. I's a deacon in the Baptist church. And that is the end of the reading for today on the Black Man's Read Aloud Hour. We have been reading the Alabama slave narratives, just the recollections of George Taylor, a very old and very black man, according to Ida B. Prane of Mobile, Alabama.